Hello, I'm Nate, aka B-Tier Mutineer, and today, as part of my Dragon Age Origins item guides, I'm going to tell you what the best dragon slaying weapons are and how you can obtain them. First, let's talk a little bit about the dragons you'll be facing. Dragon Age Origins doesn't have that many dragon enemies, but the dragons you can fight are formidable foes. The High Dragon on the mountaintop during the Urn of Sacred Ashes quest, Flemeth in her dragon form during Morrigan's quest, the Secret Dragon in Orzammar's throne room from the Caged in Stone side quest, even the Archdemon, the final boss of the game, counts as a High Dragon, while of course also being a Darkspawn. There is a younger dragon in the Brazilian Forest ruins guarding the path to the lower levels, though it's not as high level or powerful as the bosses I previously mentioned, and there are various dragonlings and drakes which should be easier to dispatch as well. Fire is not a good damage type to use against dragons. Drakes and regular dragons have complete fire immunity, while high dragons and dragonlings have high fire resistance. Against most dragon enemies, I recommend using any damage type that isn't fire, plus damage versus dragon bonuses if you can get them. The Archdemon, being the game's final boss, has much higher resistances, 75% cold, electricity, and spirit resistances, 60% fire resistance, and 30% nature resistance. So against the Archdemon, I recommend using mainly physical damage and focusing on any damage bonuses you have against dragons or Darkspawn. It has low nature resistance, so you can also try using certain items or spells that do nature damage. Crowd control effects like stun, paralyze, or freeze can affect it, so they're good to have available through spells and abilities. Let's get into the meat of things and talk about specific dragon slaying weapons. The most powerful effect you can have against dragons is the damage versus dragons property that exists on exactly 3 items in the game: Duncan's Dagger, the greatsword Yusaris, and the waraxe Axameter. I'm going to talk about these 3 weapons, but also give a bit of general advice later on about what works well against dragons. Duncan's Dagger is a tier 5 to tier 7 dagger depending on your character's level. It has plus 4 dexterity, plus 10% critical or backstab damage, plus 10 damage versus dragons, and 2 to 3 rune slots depending on the item's tier. You can loot it from the corpse of the Risen Ogre in the Return to Ostagar DLC. It's quite easy to obtain items from Return to Ostagar, but due to the fact that some items have a variable tier based on the player's level, I recommend you do a few quests that are easier to complete first in order to level up, and travel to Ostagar when you're at a slightly higher level. Yusaris is a tier 6 greatsword. It has plus 20% fire resistance, plus 10 damage versus dragons, and 2 rune slots. You can obtain it by doing the Watchguard of the Reaching side quest in the Circle Tower during the Broken Circle main quest. Be sure to do this before you complete the main quest, because otherwise I think it can get bugged. You'll be able to loot the sword from the body of the demon you summon called Shale. In order to summon the demon, you need to first find all the codex entries in the tower related to this quest. After you've collected the notes, interact with the following statues in this order. First, in the large common room, the statue holding a bowl. Second, the statue with a sword pointing up. Third, the statue with the sword pointing down. Finally, you must travel to the central room, the one leading up to the 4th floor, and interact with the statue holding a shield. Once you interact with the final statue, a journal entry should tell you that something is free in the lowest levels of the tower. Go to the ground floor, aka the apprentice quarters, and click on the basement door in the room where you found Wynn, and the demon will spawn. After you kill it, you can get Yusaris off its body. There are a couple possible issues with this quest. First, on PC in the vanilla version, there is no visual or audio cue when you click on the statues in the correct order. For this and many other issues, I recommend installing the mod Quinn's Ultimate DAO Fixback, which is the most important mod I mentioned in my DAO Essential Mods video. Second, it's occasionally possible either for the game to crash when you click on the basement door to summon the demon, or otherwise for the demon to not drop Yusaris. For this, I highly recommend saving just before clicking on the door, just in case. Last but not least, Axameter is a tier 6 waraxe. It has plus 2 damage, plus 10% critical damage, lucky, plus 4 damage versus dragons, and 2 rune slots. It can be found in the rare encounter area Strange Wood, where a group of awestruck villagers believe that whoever pulls the axe out of the tree stump will become king or queen of all Thedas. It's important to note that you can only trigger this encounter when you travel specifically from Denerim to the Brazilian Forest. In the vanilla game, it's extremely difficult to get this encounter to happen while traveling on the world map because it's very rare. However, if you have the Dane's Fixes mod installed on PC, you can solve this problem by making sure you have the random encounter frequency tweak that's part of the balance/mechanics tweaks. I highly recommend having Dane's Fixes installed in general, but it's best to read through the effects of each tweak from the mod's description to ensure that you only copy the fixes and tweaks that you want to have in the game. Another issue with this item is the lucky property, which does nothing in the base game, but is similarly fixed by Dane's Fixes in the balance/mechanics tweaks, implementing the lucky property to give plus 1% crit chance, evasion, and spell resistance per power level. Now that I've told you about the 3 weapons with damage versus dragons, we need to talk runes so that you know what to enchant your weapons with. I would recommend using a paralyze rune for characters who attack quickly, dual wielders. For second and or third runes, go for a type of damage that is least resisted by the dragon in question. For the regular dragons in the Brazilian forest, Orzammar, the high dragon on the mountaintop, and Flemeth, I recommend high tier lightning runes. The lightning damage might also drain some of the dragon's stamina. I'm not sure if it counts as stamina. But cold runes would also work well, since dragons and high dragons don't have cold resistances. Defensively, a weapon and shield tank warrior should have the shield wall talent active, with the shield expertise passive that grants immunity to knockdown effects. If you are using a more damage-focused weapon and shield warrior and don't plan on using shield wall due to the damage reduction, or you're using a dual-wielding warrior, then you'll have to put a Grandmaster Hail rune in one of their rune slots to increase your warrior's physical resistance enough for them to resist being knocked down by one of the dragon's many knockdown abilities. A two-handed warrior, regardless whether a damager or tank, should always have the Indomitable Sustained active so they're immune to knockdown, so they won't need a Hail rune in Yusaris. For the Archdemon, my offensive rune recommendations change due to the Archdemon's superior resistances. You can still use a Paralyze rune for your fast attackers, and potentially a Hail rune for your non-two-handed warriors. For your damaging runes, however, put Silverite runes which do damage versus Darkspawn. These will do extra damage to the Archdemon, as well as help you more easily dispatch the various Darkspawn that the Archdemon will summon in the fight. For mages, the choice in staff doesn't matter as much other than getting some good spell power bonuses. Spells are much more important than the staff's basic attacks. Useful spells against dragons in general are Cone of Cold and Winter's Grasp to have a chance to freeze them. Petrify or Paralyze could also work to CC them, and the huge area of effect spells like Tempest and Blizzard can be very good for continuous sustained damage. Death Hex can be great to cast if you have melee or ranged damagers, because every hit the dragon takes will be a crit, so that will increase your ally's damage by a lot. Defensively, it's great to have Force Field in order to counter the dragon's grab attack by making the ally it bites immune to damage. Against the Archdemon specifically, other than the spells I've already recommended, Stinging Swarm is the only spell that does nature damage, but I can't say I recommend picking up the other spells in the row just for this, because for the rest of the game, many enemies are resistant or even immune to nature damage. If you really don't have any other spells you want to unlock by the end of the game, you can unlock Stinging Swarm to use it against the Archdemon, but that's the only situation I recommend it for. There aren't any bows, short bows or long bows, that have a damage versus dragons bonus. However, well-built archers will do quite well against dragons even without this bonus by using abilities like Arrow of Slaying and Critical Shot to do huge amounts of damage. You can use your preferred bow, for me that's the Sorrows of Arlathan, a DLC item you get from playing through the Witch Hunt DLC, and you'll do great. If you want to give your archers special arrows in the fights against these powerful dragons, here are the ones I recommend. Against the regular dragons, use ice arrows for the cold damage. Varathorn in the Dalish camp sells 40 ice arrows for 15 silver, 84 copper each. Barlin in Lothering sells 20 arrows for 17 silver and 16 copper each. He's greedier, so just buy the arrows from Varathorn. You can also find ice arrows as part of random treasure throughout the game. Against the Archdemon, use Arrows of Filth that do nature damage. I'm not sure if you can loot these from anywhere, but you can definitely purchase 20 of them from Farron in the Frostback Mountain Pass. You can stock up on these before going to Redcliffe to prepare for the final battle. Against both types of dragons, you can use Elf Flight Arrows, which have a +6 to attack and a chance to stun, but these are far more expensive than the other two. Varathorn in the Dalish camp sells 40 of them for 51 silver, 48 copper each. Varathorn's stock replenishes after you finish 3 main quests, so if you need to, you can buy more ice or elf flight arrows from his replenished stock. Personally, I've never felt like I had to use special arrows with my archers because they already do a shit ton of damage with the aim sustained, the various passive bonuses, a good bow, and just using an auto crit like Arrow of Slaying or Critical Shot. But I mentioned the arrows as well, just in case you feel like using them. Here are the good offensive crystals to use for Shale in the 2 different situations. For regular dragons, use small ice crystals or small lightning crystals. Against the Archdemon specifically, use small nature crystals, since nature is the least resisted by the Archdemon, and Shale can only do specific elemental damage due to the design of her crystals. In terms of defenses, other than the usual good stats such as defense, armor, and chance to dodge, it's useful to have fire resistance when dealing with most dragons. For fire resistance, Wade's armor sets are pretty good, in particular Wade's Drakeskin and Superior Drakeskin set, which you can get after defeating the drakes in the mountainside caverns. You can go craft those, then return to the mountaintop to defeat the High Dragon, with 2 of your characters having good fire resistance from Wade's 2 Drakeskin sets, with one of them being superior even. Wade's dragon scale armor is nice to defend you against fire from dragons or from demons, but you need to kill the high dragon on the mountaintop to get it, so it's a bit less useful against dragons specifically after that, since you'll only need it against a dragon in the Elven Ruins if you haven't already killed it, the Orzammar Throne Dragon, and optionally Flemeth. The good thing about it, however, is that it's just a great armor set in general to use due to its other bonuses, so it doesn't lose its usefulness just because you run out of dragons to kill. Shale can equip a large fire crystal to get a good amount of fire resistance based on the tier of crystal. And of course, there are other various items with fire resistance, or you could even use warmth balm consumables to get extra fire resistance if you feel you need it. When dealing with the Archdemon, you should actually focus on spirit resistance if you can, because the Archdemon does spirit damage with its abilities. Make sure to equip Shale with a large spirit crystal if you're bringing her along to the Archdemon fight, as it will give her spirit resistance. There aren't many pieces of gear with spirit resistance. The helmet and chest piece from the medium ancient elven armor are alright. The set is otherwise quite lackluster, but at least these two pieces are good because they offer plus 35 spirit resistance. The massive Juggernaut armor set has plus 20% to all resistances, including spirit. The corruption helmet, which you can loot from the Hurlock General during the Battle of Denerim, is a helm I never recommend in any of my builds because you get it so late, but it's great against the Archdemon because it has a whopping plus 75% to spirit resistance, with 75% being the resistance cap. So you should equip your tank with that helmet so they can take a lot of the Archdemon's abilities. There are some accessories, shields, and even weapons with spirit resistance, but many of them are subpar and don't offer a high enough percentage of spirit resistance to be worth the trade-off. So just focus on getting good gear in general, with the only exception being Shale, who can easily get spirit resistance from her crystals, and a tank who can equip the corruption helmet for the max spirit resistance. For other squishier characters, you could use spirit bombs that you find throughout the game as random loot, or even craft some just before the final battle. This is where a character with a higher rank in herbalism could come in handy. Personally, I've never had issues keeping my characters alive versus the Archdemon, because by that point my characters are high level, I always have at least one mage who can heal the party, I've got plenty of healing poultices, and everyone is decked out in the best gear I could get for them. In conclusion, I think the dragon slaying weapons, the ones with damage versus dragons, are very well designed because they're not fully overpowered items you use for the whole game without having to think. They're situationally useful against one particular enemy type, which makes them nicely balanced. I think this is similarly the case with other weapons that have either damage versus darkspawn, beasts, or undead. I would have liked to see more items balanced in such a way that they're only good in certain situations, instead of having those extremely powerful weapons that are used in pretty much any build that uses that weapon type. But what do you think? Do you like these situational weapons, or do you prefer more generally applicable ones? And is there a particular weapon you think is cool but underpowered that you wish had better stats? In any case, I hope you enjoyed this item guide for the best dragon slaying weapons in Dragon Age Origins. If you're looking forward to seeing more Dragon Age videos as well as videos on other RPGs, do remember to subscribe and leave a like and comment while you're at it too. This has been B Tier Mutineer. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.